The Cleveland Browns are a fringe playoff team and a best case scenario for the 2025 season. I'll explain. Coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. We know what the worst case scenario for the Cleveland Browns looks like. But what's the best case scenario? I've got a bold one for you. We'll talk about it. If the best case scenario is going to happen, there are two position groups that will be the most important to that occurring and projecting the Browns starting defensive line. I do want to thank you for being in every day with the Locked On Browns podcast, making this your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed. Bonus content on some weekends as well, and it's totally free to you. Just hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you get your podcast, and of course at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. The best case scenario for the Browns is a team that goes, 9-8, 10-7, and is in the hunt with a chance or a shot at making the playoffs if things go right down the stretch of the season. That, to me, is where my head is at in terms of what the best case scenario potentially could be for your Cleveland Browns. And that comes on the heels of understanding what the worst case scenario is. Like, the worst case scenario for the Browns is obvious. It's the thing that we've all talked about a dozen times at this point already. The idea that they just absolutely bottom out, they stink, they win 3 games or less, or maybe 1 or 2 more, and they're one of the worst teams in the NFL, and they're drafting number 1, number 2 overall once again, and they're right back in that same position, potentially looking for their franchise quarterback. And I do think that's the scenario that most people think is going to happen. I know I've projected and predicted, as I've done on this very show, that the Browns win more than the 3 games that some are giving them, or that Vegas maybe has as like they're over under 3.5, 4.5, 5.5 are some of the numbers that I've seen. I have them winning more than that. So if to take it a step further and to potentially say that, like, hey, if everything goes right, if the quarterback situation works itself out in a way where you feel like you have a starter that can win you more football games than people are giving it credit for, then maybe they are they are in the mix come December. I'm not saying they're a Super Bowl contending team in the best case scenario, because I don't think that this team is quite there yet. And listen, it is kind of interesting to me that we're a year removed from people talking about this Browns team as if they're like a dark horse playoff Super Bowl contender, right? Like, that was some of the conversations around this team just a year ago with the roster that they had assembled. Now that goes out the window when you win only 3 games and you go 3-14 and you have this miserable year. People aren't going to give you the love that following season. And so they have to kind of wear that. They have to own that. And the roster is going through sort of a transition. They're going through a bit of an overhaul. And so I think there's some uncertainty at certain positions, especially the quarterback. And that's always going to leave room for analysts and people to just doubt how good of a team the Browns are really going to be, or any team is really going to be, when that's the situation that you're in. So I get where all that comes from 100%. And I'm not going as far as to say, again, that just because they were a Super Bowl dark horse last year, that now all of a sudden I think they're going to be in that conversation again this year. I'm not willing to be that bold with it. But I do think, like, there's a world where they surprise people, they have a dominant defense, they find their identity in the run game, and they have a quarterback that is at least giving you playing winning football the same way Joe Flacco did in 2023 behind some of those things. Strong receiving core, that at that point, strong run game, even without Nick Chubb, and you had a defense that was one of the best in the NFL. Like, if some of those things come to fruition, yeah, why can't this team win 9-10 games and put themselves in position to potentially be a playoff team come December and January? And what else is, like, the other part of this too, that's interesting. Another part of what people are basing their predictions for the Browns off of is the schedule. And I get it. Like, every year you get these projections and in these analytics that tell you, well, hey, this team has the XYZ ranked schedule this year. And the Browns have one of the hardest by a lot of those metrics. And part of that is you play in the AFC North. You got to play some of the best quarterbacks in football, at least two of them, in Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson, 4 times combined. You have a Steelers team that tends to own this Browns team over the years. 3 teams made the playoffs a couple years ago. Like, these are very competitive, highly competitive teams. The Bengals almost made it were a playoff team last year, sort of in that same situation I'm talking about the Browns being in right now, where they're on the fringe of being a playoff team. And like those things could all come to fruition just because the quarterbacks in the division and the teams in the division, and that's 6 tough games already off rip right there. And then that's on top of playing an NFC North team or an NFC North division that had 3 playoff teams a year ago, in the Packers, the Lions, and the Vikings, and a Bears team that's supposed to sort of be on the rise here and maybe make some noise. And then you throw in a 49ers team that's always a tough matchup because of the Kyle Shanahan factor. You throw in the Buffalo Bills in there. You throw in you throw in a team like the Titans who have this potentially franchise changing quarterback. Though I'm not afraid of the Titans, but I understand where you're looking and saying like, okay, yeah, there's some tougher. The Patriots always seem to be a bugaboo for Kevin Stefanski, and now they got Mike Vrabel there, who knows all your secrets. He knows what you want to do, and he is, this great coach in his own right. So there's a lot that goes into it. There's certainly some teams on the schedule that are going to be tough opponents. But I also think, here's the thing, that's all based off of last year's record. A lot of this is based off of, hey, how was this team a year ago? And so, yeah, could the Packers be a playoff team again? Sure. Could the Vikings be a playoff team again? Sure. But they have a very curious quarterback situation of their own, because right now nobody knows what JJ McCarthy's going to be. He's kind of getting thrown into the fire here, coming off of an injury in his rookie season. And so we don't know what he's actually going to look like. The Dolphins were projected to be a better team than they were last year. And it seems like there's some turmoil there, surrounded by Tyreek Hill and others. So it's like, what is that team going to look like? Like, there's a number of teams on here that could be good, and there's a number of teams on here that they might not have that great of a year. And we're basing a lot of that off of how last season went. I mean, in my schedule prediction that I did weeks ago, I had the Browns actually starting the season 2-1 with wins over the Bengals and the Packers. And if that's how you start the season, like, yeah, do I think they're going to beat the Lions in week 4? Not necessarily, but like, what if they did, because it's still early in the season? What if you go to London and you beat the Vikings? Because the Vikings will already have been out there, but it's it's across the pond. It's a Vikings team that, like I said, has questions of their own at the quarterback position. Like, you never know. And like, if they steal a few wins here or there, why can't they get to December and all of a sudden be in that conversation and it feel like they're in the mix for a potential playoff berth? Again, not saying it's going to happen. I'm not feeling like that's a prediction that I'm willing to make. But if I'm thinking about what the best case scenario for this team is, it's you settle the quarterback position with somebody who can actually win you football games and that goes out there and plays at a high enough level that you are competitive, have a great dominant run game, and you have a defense that's incredible, that gets back to being one of the best in football. And all of a sudden you put yourself in a position to be competitive in these games, give yourself a chance in these games. I mean, last year, the biggest issue was the offense, and competent quarterback play is the thing that I keep leaning on as to why the Browns are going to be better than they were a year ago. Because if you just get that, if you're just able to sustain drives up and down the field and put some points on the board, you're going to be better than a 3-win team like they were a year ago. And so I feel like they have the right people to do that. They're probably not going to reach that best case scenario because I don't know the quarterback position is going to be a strength for them. Unless they get one of these rookies to play at some point in the season and they go on a crazy run or something like that, I don't necessarily think the quarterback position is a strong suit. And you need that position to be good and play at a high level to ultimately be a true playoff team. But there is a world that exists where things go right for this team. They figure out a couple key spots and they get back to the identity that made them successful in the early years of Kevin Stefanski here. And all of a sudden you're talking about a team that is showing up on the In the Hunt graphic in the late in the season with a chance to maybe do something special if things go their way. Now, if they're going to pull that off, there are 2 position groups that are going to be key to doing it. I will talk about them coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. We have a Game 7, two best words in sports, coming your way this weekend. Chance for glory for one of these franchises in the Thunder or the Pacers. Tyrese Halliburton, he's doing it on one leg. He just put together a gutsy performance in Game 6 to help his team get to a Game 7 with the calf injury that he's dealing with. Maybe you think he's going to go off and hit a game-winning shot because he tends to do that in clutch moments, even on one leg. Maybe you think SGA is going to take over in a big spot. You can bet on all those things, and guess what? When you win, you get paid instantly. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so I laid out the best-case scenario for the Browns in the first segment. I think if it's going to happen, there are two position groups that are the most pivotal to this team's success in 2025. One of them is one that I've talked about ad nauseum already, and it's the running back room. It's the running back. It's the running game in general for the Browns. That needs to be their identity this year. And if that group can be as dominant and strong as I think it can be, which essentially will encompass Quinshon Judkins giving you some of those numbers that I projected out. Was it this week where I said 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, and just a Pro Bowl season for a rookie that sets the tone for the post Nick Chubb era. That hey, we're going to be okay. We got ourselves this new great running back to sort of lead the charge. It was Sampson sort of spelling him as your next guy up and your third down back and whatever. And plus, you got Jerome Ford thrown into the mix as well. If that happens, if you have this dominant run game behind an offensive line, and that's the thing, when you talk about the run game, you're kind of talking about the offensive line by proxy, but those two sort of tied together, those units tied together as like a general consensus, the general idea of having a strong run game, the running backs being dominant, that being the focal point and the identity of this team. That is the first position group or the first sort of area where the Browns need to be effective, strong, successful in order for that best case scenario to potentially play out. And like I said, it sort of starts in the trenches, which is ironic because you go to the other side of the ball for the other unit, the other group that I think is going to be pivotal to the Browns' success in 2025. And frankly, to reach that best case scenario I laid out, they're going to have to be. And it's the defensive line as well. It's funny that my answer here, my conversation here sort of centers around those trench spots because that is the thing we always say is the most important in football. If you can win in the trenches, you can win against anybody, right? And we just saw the Eagles dominate the Chiefs in the Super Bowl because they dominated in the trenches. They were able to dominate those areas of the field and it was they bared fruitful results in terms of dominating them to win a Super Bowl over the defending champs and a team that everyone always seems to never want to bet against because they have Patrick Mahomes. And Andrew Berry being the guy who came from the Philadelphia Eagles, trying to sort of maybe build his team the same way, where you have this defensive line that has rotations of players and you prioritize that. You invest in that with draft capital. They did that with Mason Graham. I think they clearly are signaling to you, we know we have to dominate this part of the field. We want Myles Garrett to have as much help as possible. And across the board, he's going to have that this year because they invested both money and draft capital in those key spots up front there. And I think they have a chance to be really, really good with Myles Garrett, obviously, as the focal point. Myles Garrett is the face of it all. But across the board, they're going to be deep. They're going to have a lot of depth. We're going to talk about that a little bit more here coming up. And they're going to have, I think, a starting 4 that has a chance to be really, really special. But if they can dominate and get after the passer and make life hard for opposing quarterbacks, especially with the gauntlet of quarterbacks that are on your schedule, you have, obviously, like I said, Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. You have Josh Allen on this schedule. You have Aaron Rodgers now to think about with the Steelers in your division, which Aaron Rodgers, we've seen it, we saw it last year. even though I think he still has something left in the tank in terms of his ability to throw the football, which I think came on a little bit late in the season with the Jets last year, not as mobile as he used to be. So chance to kind of get after him and make things difficult. And then you throw in some of these other quarterbacks that are in that maybe next step down where it's Jared Goff, who's part of a really good team and an offense that just dices people up. You have Jordan Love in that conversation. You have a Tua Tagovailoa in that conversation. Like, if they can get after the quarterback, if they can make life hard for those guys, and then they can also stuff opposing teams' run games with some of the players that they have up front as well, they have a chance in this attacking style they play with Jim Schwartz to get back to being that dominant front, that dominant defense that they were 2 years ago. That led to them being a playoff team, mind you, in 2023. And that's the other thing with the defensive line, man. Like, if you have a dominant defensive line, it sets the table for everybody else in the defense. Their jobs are a little bit easier. Linebackers have more clarity of what's kind of happening in front of them, where guys are going, what holes and gaps they need to fill. There's not as much traffic coming through because your defensive line is commanding so much attention and causing so many problems. The secondary, it takes some pressure off of them because they don't have to cover quite as long, especially in a defense like Jim Schwartz likes to run and coverage schemes that they have been running with the players they have, where they play a lot of man. With the Browns play a lot of man. We know that. Like, you don't have to cover quite as long if you know that Myles Garrett or Mason Graham or whoever is getting to the passer quickly. I think like that's going to that front four, that front level, just it is such a crucial part of what everybody is doing on the defensive side of the ball, and it leads to so much success if you can have that group be dominant, the same way the Eagles group was dominant last year. And so that's going to be such an important facet of this team and this defense. If they dominate up front in the trenches on the defensive line, there's no reason this defense can't be top 5 again. There's no reason why they can't maybe put the Browns in a situation where they're chasing that best case scenario that I laid out. But it has to come with an identity on offense. It can't be, because that defensive line could be dominant like I'm talking about. But if the offense stinks again and they can't move the ball and they can't put up points like they did last year, and they are just completely anemic on offense for a second consecutive year, which I don't think is going to happen. But if that does play out, now you're talking about a situation where, okay, the defense is on the field for longer stretches. They get gassed. They can only hold up for so long. They can only keep opposing teams off the scoreboard for so long. They can only keep it a 1-score game for so long. And then you're still going to lose a lot of games that way. So you can't have one without the other. But if you're talking about like getting to a best case scenario for the Browns, getting to a spot where they're maybe in the hunt in December, it starts with having a dominant defensive line and having a running back room that, as we're all sort of picturing and envisioning here with Dylan Sampson and Quinshon Judkins playing off of each other as this new dynamic duo, a lot of energy around those two guys. And if they're able to be effective as runners and establish this Browns offense with an identity that they lost the last couple of years with Deshaun Watson sort of being the focal point of the offense, then man, like they absolutely could surprise people in terms of what they accomplished this season and where they sort of fall as the season goes on, as you get to December and maybe being in that playoff picture. We'll see. I'm not predicting that myself, but those two groups are pivotal to that actually being a scenario that plays out for the Browns. It starts with the run game. It starts with the defensive lines. So those running backs, again, by proxy, the offensive line, and then that defensive line, if those two groups are dominant, this Browns team absolutely could surprise some people in 2025. It's a Fan Friday. We have a question from a fan, and I think it's a pretty good one, especially on the heels of talking about the defensive line. I will give you a prediction of what that starting group is going to look like, and we'll talk a little bit more about Shador Sanders in this latest situation with the speeding ticket, or tickets, I should say. All that coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Epicor. Every team knows the value of hard work and taking pride in what you build and in practicing every detail to get the best results. But not every player, no matter how amazing, can do it all alone. Working together makes getting the win easier. At Epicor, the all-stars are the hardworking manufacturers and distributors who create and deliver the things we all need, from aerospace to electrical to medical devices. Epicor ERP solutions are created by industry experts to help make every day easier. Seeing your whole supply chain is easier. Managing logistics is easier. Responding to price changes is also easier. For small businesses with big dreams to growing enterprises with a global vision, we'll equip you with the right tools to move forward, think ahead, and lead the way. Because as the clock ticks down, you need to make the most of every hard-working minute. Easier doesn't cut corners. Easier finds a lane. Discover your success at www.easierwithepicor.com. That's www.easierwithepicor.com. All right, so I always like to ask fan questions. I try to get this, I'm trying to have this sort of concept or this bit grow and gain some steam among you, the listener of this show. I appreciate the support from fans all the time. I try to get you guys involved. And so I usually sort of tweet out at @Spencito_ and ask people for questions or thoughts or things that they want to discuss on the show. If there's anything we haven't gotten to, I get a lot of people complaining that we talk too much about the quarterback situation, which we do need to hit on here momentarily. But I thought we got an interesting one from ADog27 on Twitter, who asked me to project out the starting defensive line and how many defensive linemen do you see the Browns keeping on their final 53. And he even makes the comment about got to talk about more than the quarterbacks, LOL. I think that's fair. Listen, I know the quarterback thing gets exhausting, and I do try to work in some other subjects like this, which is why I love this question, because we just talked about the defensive line being one of the most pivotal position groups for this Browns team in 2025 if they're going to exceed expectations. Now, in terms of the starting group, I think I have an idea in my head of what this unit's going to look like based on what we've seen so far. And this is subject to change because obviously there's a lot that can happen between now and week 1 of the season. Injuries could obviously play a role in this potentially. We hope that doesn't happen, but it could. And just performance in general. Like if guys stand out in preseason games, there's going to be maybe some shuffling of how this thing goes. But based on what I saw at minicamp, based on what the rotations kind of looked like early or throughout last week when they were practicing, I think your defensive line, your starting defensive line, looks like this. Myles Garrett obviously is one of your defensive ends. That's not a surprise. He's a recent recipient of the Defensive Player of the Year. We know how good he is. He's a Hall of Fame player. You paid him all that money. He's going to be on the field as much as possible. It's Myles. Next to Myles, some iteration of Malik Collins or Mason Graham. Those are your two interior guys. I've talked about it, but I think Mason being the draft pick for this team this year and having an interior guy that can line up next to Myles and take more attention away from him in terms of the offensive lineman. Like he can't get double teamed all the time by a tackle and a guard if you have Mason Graham there, because he is this attacking interior defensive guy who gets after quarterbacks, and they have to be mindful of that. So if you give the attention to Myles, well, here comes Mason Graham. If you give the attention to Mason, you know what Myles Garrett's going to do. I think that might actually it actually might benefit Myles Garrett more than even having like a Zadarius Smith on the opposite end of the defensive line. But I'm curious to see how that all sort of shakes out. But I'm excited about the prospect of Mason. He's going to be a starter. You took a number 5 overall. You don't take a player there and they are riding the bench. They're a backup. They're a role player, a rotational guy. And then Malik Collins, which I thought was one of the sneakier. I thought it was one of the sneaky great move for the Browns this offseason. In a year where they couldn't do much, they didn't have a lot of money to spend. Finances were tight, and they could only finagle so much in the way of trying to build this roster. The Collins signing was a phenomenal one. Guy who, as an interior defensive lineman, was 7th in pass rush win rate last year, so he can get after the quarterback and cause some problems. Again, they clearly prioritized making this an attacking front. Dalvin Tomlinson was more of like a space-eating run stopper guy. Somebody like Malik Collins gets after the quarterback. Mason Graham gets after the quarterback. So I think those three are easy in terms of projecting out this defensive line. The one that's going to get interesting is going to be the defensive end spot opposite of Myles Garrett, which sitting here today on June 20th, I would say it's Alex Wright right now. Saw a lot of Alex Wright at that spot, especially the last couple of days of minicamp. Isaiah McGuire got some work there as well with the ones, but I saw a lot of Alex Wright first. And so I think it's going to be Alex Wright with Isaiah McGuire as one of those next guys up, spelling either Miles or Alex Wright. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is going to get some run as well. And I thought he had a really good mini camp with running mostly with the twos, where he was constantly in the backfield causing some problems. So I think those guys are all locks to make this team. As we then get to the second part of ADOG 27's question of how many guys do you think they keep? I think all those pass rushers are part of the conversation, but I think the starters are Myles Garrett, Malik Collins, Mason Graham, and Alex Wright. But I do think that defensive end spot opposite of Myles in particular is going to be a heavily rotated position on top of the interior guys, because there's a lot of rotating that goes on anyway in Jim Schwartz defense and in a lot of defensive lines in the NFL in general. But I think for that spot specifically, it might be Alex Wright who starts a game, for example. But I think you'll quickly see Isaiah McGuire getting in there, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka getting in there, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of how many guys they keep, I went back the last 2 years with Jim Schwartz at the helm. How many guys did they keep at the roster cut down? And it ended up being 9 both times. So in 2023, they kept Miles, Isaiah McGuire, Alex Wright, Ogbo Okoronkwo, who they just signed that year, Zadarius Smith, Shelby Harris, Dalvin Tomlinson, Siaki Ika. That year, they kept a lot more edge rushers than they did interior guys. What ended up happening was they added Mo Hurst, who I think was released shortly after that. Or actually, he might have been cut because I think he was actually on their team. They cut him and then re-signed him a couple of days later in 2023 or whatever it was the next day once he cleared waivers. So they did bring him back and sort of add another defensive tackle in the mix. And then in 2024, last year, they also kept 9. Miles, Zadarius Wright, McGuire, Okoronkwo, Quentin Jefferson, who was here last year, obviously Dalvin, who was here last year, Mo Hurst, there's his name again, and Shelby Harris, who they brought, who was part of the 2023 group that they kept as well. Now, some of these guys are still around. Shelby Harris is still around. Obo Okoronkwo is still around. And I don't to me, Okoronkwo is kind of fighting for his job, I think, in training camp. So in terms of the guys that are going to be on this roster when they cut it down to 53, I think it's Miles. I think it's Mason. I think it's Malik. I think it's Alex Wright. I just said that. I think it's Isaiah McGuire. We're up to 5. I think it's Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. We're up to 6. Michael Jr., assuming he's healthy, he's going to be factored in here. And the Browns are hoping to get some big numbers from him as a second-round pick. He's going to be heavily rotated in. But I do think somebody like Malik Collins gets the nod over Michael Jr., but he's going to be heavily rotated in. He's going to be an important piece in this defensive front. Shelby Harris, I think, maybe is still part of this equation because you need defensive interior guys, and he, I think, is still going to be a nice rotational piece to have. And then I have Ogbo Okoronkwo making it for now, but you could sell me maybe on a Sam Kamara because Kamara's played both inside and outside, and so he has a little more versatility in that way. What's interesting with Ogbo Okoronkwo is that the Browns can save over $3 million this year by releasing him, but they also take on a nearly $2 million dead money hit plus another $4.7 million next year, which isn't necessarily great because I'm at least anticipating they're going to be eating a lot of dead money for Deshaun Watson's deal next year. And so any way you can minimize that, I think the better. Granted, Okoronkwo is going to come with a dead cap hit anyway next year because they have a bunch of money spread out in a void year. So how they want to handle that remains to be seen. There was some talk that they might cut Ogbo Okoronkwo anyway. So maybe he is on the outside looking in. I think he is probably fighting for a roster spot when training camp opens up. And that's going to be part of one of these intense competitions that we're going to see at training camp over the course of that month and a half or so. So we'll see. But right now, I think as things stand, I have him in there as the 9th guy that makes it. They ultimately, I could see them keeping 10 though, if depending on what they keep at other positions, and that's going to get interesting because I think they're probably keeping 4 running backs. I think Pierre Strong probably makes this roster, and you keep 4, and he's a return option for you. What they do at receiver will be interesting, especially if they make a move. The quarterback situation is interesting because some people think they're going to keep 4. I don't see it happening, but some people are projecting that. And that's that when those numbers all kind of fall into place, that's how you decide how many offensive linemen you can keep, how many defensive linemen you can keep, because those are some of the bigger groups that you prioritize keeping guys. And who knows, maybe they will keep more offensive linemen just in general because they've had such a problem with those guys being healthy over the last several years that they want to have a deeper roster to go to. We'll see. But that right now is, I think, my projection of the guys who will start for this team up front, and then what the reserves will kind of look like when we get to roster cutdown day. at the end of training camp, which I guess to A-Dog27's question, that's not the final 53 technically, because you always cut it down. And then a couple of days later, there's so much shuffling that goes on based on guys that get released and things. So it could look a lot different, but without knowing who's going to be available and who's going to be out there to add, those are the 9 that I have making it right now. And I think there's a case to be made for maybe a 10th in there, or if there's a move that's made that they end up keeping 10 because they signed somebody from some other team, it could happen that way as well. Real quick, before we get out of here, I did want to touch on this because I talked yesterday about Shador Sanders' speeding ticket situation and how I don't think it's a big deal. I stand by that, but worth noting that there was a second speeding ticket that he got in early June, missed his arraignment hearing on the 16th, so this past Monday, and people are now questioning, well, how did he get another speeding ticket? Why did this happen? What's going on here? And wondering also why he missed his arraignment. Now, there may be a valid reason why he missed it. He might have already worked that out with the courts. Who knows? I'm not going to speculate on that. The main reason I wanted to talk about this was because Shador Sanders at David Njoku's celebrity softball game sort of spoke on this. He was caught on video saying, listen, I made mistakes. I can own it. I learned from it. And that's, again, my biggest point in all this. Is it a bad look? Sure. Speeding tickets aren't great. But I think everybody generally can say they've gotten one in their life, or they've at least been close to getting one and maybe avoided it, right? That was my main point yesterday. This does not have to define Shador Sanders from a character standpoint. It doesn't have to define him from a quarterback on the field standpoint. Is there some maybe trusting? Is there a process of earning back trust from the organization that maybe has to go on here? Maybe to an extent, yeah. But I don't think that's going to impact him come training camp time in terms of like how this organization views him, treats him, whatever. He's going to have a shot at this thing. And frankly, based on how this organization has handled any off the field situations in the past, I mean, Mike Hall Jr. was their first pick they took last year, and he got himself in that domestic dispute that played out very publicly and went to court and all that. And he was still a player that they felt pretty highly of and wanted to see play out there. And he was rotating in quite a bit when he was healthy. So I think this doesn't have to be an indictment on him. I mean, this organization tends to handle these things in-house and tends to give guys multiple chances to sort of go out and take their best foot forward, or, take the best, put their best foot forward, and, not let it be a hindrance in terms of getting the opportunities and feeling like they're an important part of the team. So I'm not worried about it. I know some people maybe are making a bigger deal out of it, and there probably is a level of like, okay, there's some maybe immaturity there that they want to make sure they're on the same page and that they can trust him, especially if he becomes the face of the franchise at some point. The quarterback has held to a higher standard. But I also think there's room for grace for Shador Sanders when you realize, hey, he's basically a college-age kid. He did something silly or stupid, and as long as he learns from it like he says he's going to, it'll all be all good. It'll all be okay. It'll be water under the bridge when it's all said and done. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. We got plenty more to come next week. I'm working on some guests here in the weeks ahead as we continue to count you down to the start of training camp. I know it's the dog days of summer, but we'll have some fun with it. We'll get some other good conversations going. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting, or keep it local. As I always like to remind you, check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being here every day at the Locked On Podcast Network. Talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. Have a good weekend. See you.